There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when someone sits across from you and the words they speak feel like they were written just for your life. Your guard begins to lower. The heart leans forward, and in that single breath, everything inside you wants to believe this could be safe. But mature people never do. They pause. They watch. They wait. Because they've seen what happens when trust arrives before time has had its say. If you've ever looked back on a relationship, a partnership, or even a friendship, and wondered how you missed the signs, stay with me. The fifth sign I'm going to share is the one that sits closest to the everyday decisions we all make. The one that can quietly reshape how you move through your entire life. These truths don't shout. They settle in. And if this way of seeing human nature speaks to you, I gently invite you to subscribe to Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom, so these quiet laws keep reaching you when the world feels loud. Welcome back to Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. I'm David Welbeck, the writer behind this video. Today, we're exploring a single, steady truth that shapes every meaningful connection we will ever have. Why mature people never trust too quickly. Not because the world is dangerous, but because human nature follows patterns older than any of us. Patterns that reward patience, self-mastery, and clear sight, and quietly punish the rest. We ignore them at the cost of our peace, our time, and sometimes our very sense of self. The first sign appears in the very first exchange, long before any real history has been written. In the spirit of strategic wisdom, it is said that the river that sings loudest at the source is often the shallowest. That is not genuine flow. That is performance dressed as depth. In modern life, this is the person whose warmth feels immediate and complete. They remember small details from a single conversation. They mirror your hopes, your frustrations, your dreams with uncanny precision. Within minutes, the connection feels almost fated. It's like I've known you for years, they say, and the words land softly. But look closer. The psychology here is ancient and precise. Human beings crave belonging. When someone reflects our inner world back to us so perfectly and so soon, the instinct for caution falls silent. We mistake rapid rapport for real understanding because the alternative, slow, careful observation, feels lonely in the moment. Desire for connection overrides discipline. You see it in new friendships that bloom over coffee, in dating when someone shares their entire past on the first evening, or in work when a colleague bonds over shared ambitions before the first project deadline. The setting feels intimate precisely because it moves so fast. I once met someone at a small industry gathering. Within an hour, they had told me their deepest professional fear and asked about mine. The conversation felt electric. I opened up about a stalled venture I rarely spoke of. 2 weeks later, I discovered they had repeated my story, slightly altered with my name attached, to a mutual contact who happened to be a competitor. It was not malice. It was simply that their need to create instant closeness had no anchor in restraint. The consequence was not dramatic betrayal. It was the slow erosion of my own clarity. I had given away something precious before time had proven it could be held. This is where most people get it wrong. They believe early openness is a sign of sincerity. But the real question is not whether the words feel true in the moment. The real question is whether the character behind them has learned to wait before speaking. Do you see the turning point here? Trust that arrives too quickly is often just hunger wearing the mask of connection. Mature people notice the speed and choose to slow the current. The second sign reveals itself when small tests arrive before any real foundation has been laid. Strategic insight has always pointed out that the branch that bends too willingly will snap when the real weight comes. That is not flexibility. That is the absence of inner structure. Today, this appears as the person who presses for immediate reciprocity. They share a vulnerability and then lean in, waiting for you to match it. They ask for a small favor early, just between us, and frame hesitation as distrust. If we're really going to be close, we should be able to count on each other right away, they say. The pressure is gentle, almost kind, but it is pressure all the same. The human instinct at work is the deep need to feel secure through symmetry. When someone offers a piece of themselves, our psychology pushes us to balance the scales quickly. We hand over trust to avoid seeming cold or guarded. Yet this exchange is rarely equal. One side is testing how far the other will go before boundaries appear. This plays out in families when a relative shares a private struggle and then expects you to reveal your own finances or marriage tensions in return. It shows in ambition-driven circles where a new contact offers inside information and waits for you to reciprocate with your own. It surfaces in early romance when someone wants exclusivity after 3 conversations. The consequence is subtle but profound. You begin to confuse obligation with connection. You trade pieces of your inner life not because it feels right, but because refusing feels rude. Over time, you lose the quiet discipline of deciding for yourself when and with whom to be open. And the relationship that felt so promising starts to feel like a quiet negotiation instead of a safe harbor. Look at reality for what it is. Forced reciprocity is not intimacy. It is a strategy for speeding up the bond before character has had time to show itself. Wise people feel the gentle push and choose to step back. They know that real trust is never demanded. It is observed over seasons. The real question is not whether you want to meet their expectation. The real question is whether meeting it now serves the long-term clarity you are trying to protect. The real question is not whether you want to meet their expectation. The real question is whether meeting it now serves the long-term clarity you are trying to protect. The third sign surfaces in the small inconsistencies that most people brush aside because they seem harmless in the beginning. Strategic wisdom has always observed that the vessel with the thinnest walls cracks first under heat. That is not minor imperfection. That is the early signal that the whole cannot hold pressure. In everyday terms, this is the person whose words and actions begin to drift apart almost immediately. They speak of loyalty with conviction, yet they are late to follow through on even the smallest promise. They praise your discretion, but casually mention something you shared in passing. The gap is never large enough to call them out, yet it is there. Steady, repeating, impossible to ignore once you decide to look. Human psychology explains it plainly. We are wired to fill in blanks with hope. When someone's overall energy feels warm, the mind smooths over the small fractures because admitting them would force us to slow down and reassess. Ego prefers the comfort of the story we have already started writing. This person is good. Restraint feels like suspicion, so we let the inconsistencies slide. You notice it in friendships where a new acquaintance swears they will keep something private, then lets it slip in the very next conversation. It appears in work when a colleague promises to back your idea in the meeting, but stays silent when the moment arrives. It shows in early romantic connections when someone claims they value slow, intentional time together, but pushes for constant contact and immediate plans. I once worked alongside someone who entered our circle with remarkable ease. She spoke eloquently about teamwork and trust, Yet week after week, the small commitments she made, a shared report, a follow-up email, a quiet word of support, would arrive incomplete or delayed. When I gently pointed it out, the response was always smooth. Life just got busy. The consequence was not one big failure. It was the slow draining of my own energy as I compensated for the gaps, adjusting my expectations downward until the relationship no longer felt like a partnership, but a quiet lesson in self-reliance. This is where most people get it wrong. They wait for a dramatic contradiction before they withdraw trust. But mature people understand that character is revealed in the micro moments long before the crisis arrives. The real question is not whether the person means well. The real question is whether their daily discipline matches the image they present. Do you see the turning point here? Inconsistency in small things is never about the small things. It is the early map of how someone behaves when no one is watching closely. Wise people read that map and adjust their trust accordingly. The fourth sign appears when someone begins to sell their own trustworthiness too loudly and too soon. In the current of strategic insight, it is said that the one who must announce their honesty has already revealed the doubt within. That is not confidence. That is a shield raised before any arrow has been drawn. Today, this shows up as the person who repeatedly emphasizes how reliable they are. I'm the kind of person you can always count on, they say, unprompted. They volunteer stories of past loyalty as if to prove their worth before you have asked for proof. The language feels reassuring at first, yet the very need to convince you carries its own quiet warning. The psychology is rooted in self-awareness and projection. People who have struggled with consistency in the past often overcompensate by performing sincerity. The instinct is to secure your approval quickly so that when their own impulses later pull them in another direction, you will hesitate to question them. It is a preemptive strike against future judgment. This pattern appears across settings. In family, when a relative insists they have changed and are now completely different before any evidence has accumulated. In social competition, where a new contact swears they would never speak behind your back, yet does so in subtle ways within weeks. In marriage or partnership, when someone declares early on that they are all in while their actions still carry the scent of calculation. The consequence lands heavily once you realize the performance was covering a deeper uncertainty. You begin to question your own judgment for having believed the sales pitch. You carry the weight of having opened doors that should have remained closed longer. And in protecting the relationship you invested in too early, you sometimes lose pieces of your own clarity and peace. Look at reality for what it is. True character does not need a billboard. It simply lives consistently until the pattern becomes undeniable. Mature people do not argue with announcements of trustworthiness. They wait for the evidence that arrives without fanfare. The real question is not whether their words sound believable. The real question is whether their behavior has earned the right to be believed over time. The fifth and perhaps most subtle sign reveals itself when someone cannot tolerate the natural pauses that real trust requires. Strategic wisdom whispers that the mind in constant motion cannot hear the quiet truth beneath the surface. That is not eagerness for connection. That is fear of being truly seen. In modern life, this appears as the person who rushes every stage of knowing. They dislike silence in conversation. They push for next steps before the present one has been lived. They want definitions, labels, commitments long before the relationship has been tested by ordinary days. Why wait? Becomes their unspoken theme. The human instinct here is the deep discomfort with uncertainty. Waiting forces us to sit with our own inner life, with the possibility that the other person might not be what we hope. Many would rather force progress than face that discomfort. So they accelerate the timeline, hoping speed will outrun the need for genuine self-mastery. You see it in ambition, when a new collaborator wants contracts signed before the first joint project has even begun. In family dynamics, when someone demands emotional closeness after a single vulnerable talk. In everyday interactions where a person fills every quiet moment with plans and promises so that no space remains for honest observation. The consequence is the quiet tragedy of relationships built on sand. You lose yourself trying to keep pace with their urgency. You trade patience for performance. And when the inevitable cracks appear, because no foundation was allowed to form, you face not only the loss of the connection, but the deeper loss of time and self-trust. Near the end of this reflection, we bring the philosophy down from the abstract into the lived texture of our days. Time does not forgive rushed trust. Relationships fracture under the weight of expectations placed too soon. Family bonds strain when we mistake intensity for depth. Work and social competition expose us when we hand over influence before character has been weighed. The loneliness that follows betrayal is heavier because we chose the wrong moment. And in trying to hold on to others by giving them pieces of ourselves prematurely, we risk losing the very center of who we are. What truly reveals a fake person? It is not one dramatic act. It is the steady pattern of refusing to let time do its slow, honest work. A wise person watches for the 5 signs we have explored: the speed of warmth, the push for early reciprocity, the small inconsistencies, the loud announcements of virtue, and the intolerance for natural pauses. They do not wait for proof of harm. They simply refuse to ignore the early signals that self-mastery is absent. Why do so many people mistake performance for sincerity? Because the heart wants to believe. Because slowing down feels like missing out. Because admitting the need for patience forces us to confront our own desires and fears. It is easier to rush forward than to sit in the quiet discipline of watching and waiting. The mature person is not a saint and not perfect. They are simply someone who has learned what matters. They know what to protect: their inner peace, their long-term vision, their hard-earned clarity. They know what to let go of: connections that demand trust before it has been earned through seasons and pressure. They know when to wait, until patterns prove themselves under ordinary light and ordinary stress. And they know when to act. The moment instinct signals that composure and restraint are missing in the other. Thank you for staying with me until the end. These truths are not always comfortable, yet they are the ones that quietly shape a life of greater freedom and fewer regrets. This has been Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. I'm David Welbeck, the writer behind these videos. I'll see you in the next one. If this exploration of why mature people never trust too quickly resonates with where you are right now, consider subscribing if you have not already, so these reflections continue to find you. Share the video with someone whose judgment you value. Perhaps they are standing at one of these very turning points. And if something here stirred a memory or a realization, leave a comment below. Your experience may become the quiet insight another person needs on their own path. Until next time, let time do its work. It is, after all, the one ally that never misleads those who learn to wait with clear eyes.